Hello and welcome back to Silent Husband Club. We know it's been a while since our last story, but we're back, and we'll do our best to bring you a new one every single day. Sometimes, the most dangerous betrayals don't start with shouting, slammed doors, or obvious lies. They begin with something far smaller: a missed dinner, a delayed text, a smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes. And by the time you realize what's happening, it's already too late. If you enjoy these stories, please subscribe, hit the like button, and leave a comment. It truly helps the channel grow and ensures you never miss a new video. I used to believe my marriage was unshakable. Evelyn and I had built it on trust, shared goals, and a rhythm that felt almost sacred. We had been together for 7 years, and although our love wasn't the wild, movie-type passion, it was something I thought was far more valuable, steady, deep, and safe. We first met during college. Back then, we were little more than acquaintances who occasionally crossed paths in group projects or at parties. But slowly, without realizing it, we began orbiting closer. She was sharp, ambitious, charming, a woman who knew exactly what she wanted. And I admired her for it. Loved her for it. Life had been good to us. Not perfect, but good. We lived in a modest but warm apartment in a quiet Boston neighborhood. We had our routines, and Friday nights were sacred. No matter how stressful the week had been, those evenings belonged to us. We cooked together, opened a bottle of wine, and talked about anything and everything. Sometimes about work, sometimes about our dreams, and sometimes about nothing important at all, just nonsense that made us laugh until we forgot the rest of the world existed. Evelyn worked at a respected company and had been steadily climbing the ladder. She loved her work, maybe a little too much sometimes, but I never minded. I wanted her to chase her dreams, and I was proud of her. I had a well-paying job with predictable hours, which gave me time to appreciate what we had. We were a team. Looking back now, I can't pinpoint the exact moment when things began to shift. It was gradual, so subtle that I didn't see it until it was already happening. Evelyn began working late. At first, it was once in a while. Then more often. She told me she'd taken on a demanding new project. She looked tired, distracted. When I asked if everything was okay, she'd smile, that small, tight smile, and tell me it was just a busy phase. I believed her. Why wouldn't I? But then came the cancellations. First, it was dinner with friends. Then a movie we had planned for weeks. Every time, she had a reasonable excuse: a meeting, an urgent email, a call with a client. I told myself I understood. I didn't want to be the husband who clipped her wings. And then, she canceled a Friday night. Our night. That was the first time I felt it, the strange, unwelcome tightness in my chest. I didn't know what to call it yet. Doubt? Fear? I didn't want to exaggerate, but I couldn't ignore it either. That night, I sat alone at our table, staring at a glass of wine that stayed untouched. She texted me earlier, saying she was going out for drinks with colleagues. I told her to have fun. Told myself it was nothing. And yet, deep inside, something small and dark had begun to stir. It didn't stop there. The late nights multiplied. The quick drinks after work became routine. She still kissed me goodbye in the morning, still laughed at my jokes, but there was a distance now, a faint but undeniable one. Sometimes, I'd see her lying in bed at night, lit by the glow of her phone, smiling at a message. When I'd ask who it was, she'd say, "Rachel. She's having a rough day," or just a coworker, "We're sorting out something for tomorrow." I wanted to believe her. At first, I did. But then she began putting her phone face down on the table, or tucking it away as soon as she walked through the door. She had never done that before. It was such a small thing, but I noticed. And I didn't forget. One Saturday morning, before she woke, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. I shouldn't have looked. But I did. Just one word flashed on the screen from an unknown number: "Miss you." My heart skipped. I didn't recognize the number. I knew I should ignore it, tell myself it was a mistake. But as she stirred awake and reached for her phone, I saw her expression shift for the briefest moment when she read the message. It was barely perceptible, a flicker of tension in her eyes, but enough to lodge itself deep in my mind. "Who was that?" I asked, keeping my tone light. She blinked and locked her phone. "No one. Just a wrong number." Her voice was calm, her body relaxed, but she didn't look at me when she said it. And that's when I knew something wasn't right. Over the next few weeks, the late nights, the sudden urgent calls, and the carefully guarded phone became part of our new, unspoken routine. Evelyn had an explanation for everything, and none of them sounded outrageous, but they also didn't feel entirely real. I began noticing little shifts I had never paid attention to before: the extra 15 minutes she spent getting ready in the morning, the new dresses she said she bought just to treat herself, the perfume that lingered long after she'd left for work. She laughed it off when I commented on it, saying she just needed a change, but the more she changed, the further away she felt. Then there were the calls. Once, if her phone rang while we were together, she'd answer on speaker without a second thought. Now, she would pick it up, glance at the screen, and excuse herself into another room, sometimes the bedroom, sometimes the balcony, always somewhere I couldn't hear. When I'd ask later who it was, I'd get the same vague answers: just Rachel, or someone from the office. They were plausible, but they didn't make the knot in my stomach loosen. One evening, she messaged me to say she was going for drinks with colleagues after work. I didn't think much of it until the hours kept slipping by. By the time I heard her key in the lock, it was close to midnight. She smiled faintly, looking exhausted, and collapsed onto the sofa. There was the scent of alcohol on her breath, but underneath it, faint yet sharp, was something else. A cologne I didn't recognize. Not hers. Not mine. I asked how her night was, and she gave me the same soft answer: it was nice, just catching up with everyone. When I pressed for names, she hesitated before offering the familiar shield: Rachel was there. That night, something in me broke through the fog of doubt. While she disappeared into the shower, she left her phone on the table. I didn't dare try to unlock it, but I didn't have to. I opened my laptop, logged into our shared cloud, and scrolled through the most recent uploads. Buried between photos from our last vacation was one I had never seen before. Evelyn, in a deep green dress I didn't recognize, holding a glass of wine. And beside her, a man I'd never met, leaning in close, their shoulders touching, his smile wide, hers even wider. The sound of running water from the bathroom seemed suddenly deafening. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. I stared at the photo until the edges blurred, a cold, hollow weight settling in my chest. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't stress from work. This was betrayal. I closed the laptop just as the water stopped, forcing my face into something neutral. I didn't know what I was going to do, not yet, but I knew there was no way back to the man I had been before seeing that picture. Something irreversible had been set in motion. When Evelyn stepped out of the bathroom, wrapped in her robe, hair damp and skin still flushed from the heat, she looked completely at ease, as if the night had been nothing but harmless fun. But I couldn't see her the same way anymore. My mind kept replaying that photo, over and over, the angle of her body toward his, the easy intimacy in her smile. I told myself for weeks that my fears were just paranoia, but now the truth sat heavy in my chest like a stone. I didn't plan to confront her right away, but the words slipped out before I could stop them. "Who is he?" My voice was steady, sharper than I expected. She blinked, pretending not to understand, so I opened the laptop and turned the screen toward her. Her face lost all color in an instant. For a moment, we just stared at each other, the sound of the city outside the window the only noise between us. Finally, she drew in a slow breath. "Daniel, it's not what you think." I laughed, a bitter, humorless sound that didn't even feel like it belonged to me. "Not what I think. You've been telling me you're with Rachel, and instead you're sitting in a bar with him, looking like—" I stopped myself, not because I didn't have the words, but because I wasn't sure I wanted to hear them out loud. She looked down, her hands curling into fists at her sides. I pushed once more. "Say it. Tell me you've been cheating on me. I deserve at least that much." Her lips trembled before she finally whispered, "It was a mistake." A mistake. That's what she called it. 4 months of lying, 4 months of stolen evenings, 4 months of smiling at me while keeping another life hidden in the shadows. I felt something inside me fracture. "How long?" I asked, my voice so low it was almost a growl. "For months," she admitted, her eyes glassy with tears. I wanted to demand every detail, to force her to explain exactly how it started, what they did, where they met. But another part of me, the part that still clung to the version of her I'd loved, couldn't bear to hear it. Instead, I asked the one question that still burned: why? She wiped at her cheeks, but the tears kept falling. "I don't know. It wasn't planned. I felt lonely. Work was consuming me, and you seemed so caught up in your own life. I know it's not an excuse, but—" "No," I cut her off. "It's not an excuse. And it's not a justification." We stood there in silence, the air between us thick and heavy. I realized then that there was nothing she could say to make this better, no string of words that could stitch back together what she had torn apart. Without another word, I grabbed my jacket and keys. "I need air," I muttered, stepping past her and out into the cold night. The moment the door closed behind me, the city's chill hit my skin, sharp and cleansing. I walked without direction, without destination, my thoughts a storm I couldn't calm. Every step took me further from the life I thought I had, and closer to the truth I could no longer ignore. I don't know how long I walked that night. The streets were mostly empty, the glow of street lamps stretching shadows across the pavement, my breath visible in the cold air. I passed closed shops, darkened cafes, and the occasional sound of distant traffic. But inside me, there was no silence, only the relentless pounding of my thoughts, the images of Evelyn with him looping like some cruel, broken film reel. 4 months. For months she had smiled at me in the morning and kissed me goodnight, all while knowing what she was doing. I kept wondering if there had been a moment, even once, when she'd felt guilty enough to stop, or if I had simply been an obstacle she navigated around with practiced ease. Eventually, I found myself in a small park we'd once visited together in the early days of our marriage. I sat on a cold bench, my hands shoved deep into my pockets, staring at the dark silhouette of the trees. The memory of that day came back sharply, Evelyn laughing as the wind caught her hair, her cheeks flushed from the chill, her hand warm in mine. Back then, I thought those moments would be the foundation of a lifetime. Now, they felt like fragments of a life that had belonged to someone else entirely. I could feel the anger simmering, but it was drowned under a crushing weight of emptiness. It's a strange thing when you expect to rage, to break something, but instead all you can do is sit still because there's nothing left in you to burn. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I didn't need to look to know it was her. I let it ring out the first time, then again, then again. The vibrations felt like they were echoing through my ribs. I imagined her pacing the living room, rehearsing the words she thought might fix this, maybe even crying, but I also imagined her doing the same for him. And that thought made my stomach turn. I wasn't ready to hear her voice, not yet. Maybe not ever. By the time I walked back toward the apartment, the The sky was starting to pale with the first hint of dawn. My steps slowed as I reached our building, a part of me wishing I could just keep walking forever. But reality has a way of catching up to you, no matter how far you try to go. I climbed the stairs, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. She was sitting on the sofa, knees pulled to her chest, her face streaked with tears. The moment she saw me, she opened her mouth to speak, but I raised a hand to stop her. My voice was low, almost calm. "Don't. It's over." The words seemed to hit her physically, her shoulders collapsing as if I'd taken the air from the room. "Daniel, please," she started, but I shook my head. "There's no please anymore. I can't trust you. And without trust, there's nothing left." She stared at me, her lips trembling, but for once she didn't argue. She just sat there, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her, as if she finally understood that this was real. I didn't pack right away. For a few seconds, I just stood there, staring at her, the woman I'd shared 7 years of my life with, trying to reconcile the person in front of me with the one I thought I knew. My hands felt heavy, my chest tight, but I forced myself to move. I walked into the bedroom, pulled my old duffel bag from under the bed, and began gathering my things. Each shirt, each book, each small possession felt like it carried a piece of the life we'd built, and now I was tearing it apart with my own hands. I could hear her quiet sobs from the living room, but I didn't look at her. If I did, I might hesitate, and hesitation was dangerous now. When the bag was full, I zipped it up and carried it to the door. I paused, glancing back one last time. She was still on the sofa, her face buried in her hands. I thought about the early years, about the countless Friday nights cooking together, the trips we took, the laughter that used to fill this place. All of it felt like it belonged to someone else now, someone more naive, someone who believed that love was enough to keep betrayal away. "I hope you find what you're looking for," I said quietly. My voice barely carried across the room, but she heard it. She looked up at me with eyes that seemed to plead for more time, for a different ending. I opened the door and stepped out before she could say anything. The air outside was colder than before, or maybe it just felt that way because I was walking away from the warmth of everything I knew. I didn't have a clear destination, only the knowledge that I couldn't stay. That night, I checked into a cheap motel on the other side of the city. The room smelled faintly of cleaning chemicals, the bed was stiff, and the single lamp cast a dim, yellow glow. But it was mine. No shadows of her here, no ghost of the man she'd been with, no memories lingering in the walls. In the days that followed, I found a small apartment and started moving my things in. I cut off contact completely. Her number stayed in my phone, but I didn't answer her calls, and I didn't read her messages. I told myself there was nothing left to say, and even if there was, hearing her voice would only reopen the wound. Still, at night, lying in my new bed, I sometimes caught myself listening to the silence, half expecting the sound of her key in the door. That's when I realized healing wouldn't come quickly. It would be slow, painful, and relentless, but it would come. Weeks passed, each one peeling away another thin layer of the life I had once shared with Evelyn. The apartment began to feel less like a stranger's place and more like my own. I rearranged the furniture, replaced the dishes, even bought a different brand of coffee, small rebellions against the memories that tried to creep in. Every so often, my phone would light up with her name. Long messages appeared, sometimes in the middle of the night, telling me she was sorry, that she missed me, that she had made the worst mistake of her life. I read them, but I never replied. There was nothing to be gained from reopening a wound that was finally, slowly beginning to close. I started to notice things again, the quiet hum of the city at dawn, the way sunlight stretched across my kitchen floor in the morning, the freedom of deciding what to do with my evenings without waiting for someone else's schedule. Yet even with this new sense of independence, there were moments when the weight of it all pressed down on me. Nights when the silence felt too deep, Why, I would remember the sound of her laugh or the warmth of her beside me in bed, and I'd feel that old ache in my chest. Healing wasn't a straight line, it was a jagged path, with moments of clarity followed by sudden drops into sadness. One evening, I passed by a restaurant where Evelyn and I had celebrated our first anniversary. I stopped outside for a moment, watching couples through the window, hands reaching across tables, quiet smiles exchanged over wine. I felt the familiar sting of loss, but this time, it was tempered by something else. Acceptance. I finally understood that love, no matter how strong it seems, cannot survive without trust. And once that trust is broken, no apology, no promise, no tearful confession can truly rebuild it. When I walked away from that window, I knew there would be other nights like this, other memories waiting to catch me off guard. But I also knew I would keep moving forward. I had survived a moment I thought would break me. And in surviving, I had learned the most important truth of all: sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is let go.
Thank you for watching. If this story touched you, shocked you, or simply made you think, don't keep it to yourself. Leave a comment, your thoughts, your story, your truth. Subscribe for more raw, real, and unforgettable confessions. And if this story made you feel seen, share it. Someone else might need to hear it too. You're not alone here. This channel is a safe space for those who've been betrayed, broken, and rebuilt.